Okay, just a quick reminder as we get started here. I know we deviated from the syllabus just a little bit, but as I mentioned in class, I needed the second time that we talked about the excretory system to be a face-to-face meeting so that we could get some of those lab activities in. And so that pushed our digestion and nutrition talk back a few days. So you will be in your digestion packet, and the things that I'm going to talk about are an extension of what was introduced initially in that packet. So you can put the notes from today's lecture somewhere in that packet on the back of the page. You can do a completely different sheet if you want to. There are not going to be any specific slides that tie to this information. It is just an extension of what was already in that packet. So whatever method works for you to take these notes through this section is perfectly fine, but please don't be looking for specific slides within that packet as we move through this talk. So looking at digestion, we talked about all the parts that are in the digestive system, how we have to introduce the food into the body and then use the act of chewing to break it down, expose as much of the surface area on the food as possible so that as it moves through the digestive tract, we have the maximum chance of extracting all of the vitamins and nutrients and other materials that are within that food and get it over into our bloodstream. Because initially, remember, those food molecules, number one, are too big. So if we didn't chew them up and mash them down and work all of those chemicals and enzymes into it to break them down into smaller parts, we would never be able to access any of the benefit out of those foods. The other thing with the process of digestion is the fact that as we put it into our bodies, it's not in a usable form. Because of how the molecules are bonded together, our body is not made out of any of those materials. We have to break it down, get it back into the individual parts so that we can then select how we want to rebuild those molecules together into things that our body actually needs and our body is actually made of. If you remember back in first semester, we did an entire section on enzymes and we talked about the process of anabolism and catabolism, which is building up molecules and breaking molecules down. So taking big long chains of molecules and breaking them down into their individual pieces and then doing just the opposite of that. And so that ties in with this talk as well. We're doing that exact same process. As we put those foods in, we can't use them as is. We have to break them down, get them to their individual pieces. So one of the things that we talked about as food was moving through our body is that there are several different places where digestive enzymes are going to be introduced to the food to help that digestive process along. So the act of chewing is not enough. It doesn't expose enough of the food to really be able to get at everything that is available. So once we pass that food through the digestive system, there are several different spots, like I mentioned, where an additional digestive enzyme will be added to the process to help it along. So when we first talked about the mouth, we have the digestive enzyme known as amylase, which is going to be introduced to the food that is present in our mouth. And as you chew and move the food around in your mouth, that saliva is going to get worked into the food, and that amylase is really going to have a chance to target anything that is carbohydrate based in your mouth. Now, a couple of things that we didn't really talk about specifically when we went through this piece is when we talk about carbohydrates, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about sugars and we're talking about starches. Now, carbohydrates are going to offer you 4 calories for every 1 gram. So if you are a person that really looks at food labels and it talks about how many grams of carbs are present in whatever you are eating, so if you have 20 grams of carbohydrates in something that you are about to take in, you would take that 20 grams, multiply it by 4. 80 calories are going to come from the carbohydrates alone. So there's 4 calories for every 1 gram of carbohydrate that you put into your body. Now, carbohydrates do come in two different forms, like I mentioned. So you can have sugars and you can have starches. The difference between the two is really the length of the chains that make them up. Starches are going to be much longer, and sugars are going to be much shorter in length. So the molecule itself is a long chain, all linked together if we're talking about starches, and it's a shorter chain if we're talking about sugars. Why does that make a difference? Well, when you introduce carbohydrates into your body, the length of the chain is going to determine how long it's going to take you to break it down. Because sugars are shorter chains, those molecules are shorter in size, it takes you less time to break it down. What does that mean for you? It means you access or tap into that energy supply much faster. Because starches are much longer, it takes the body a longer time to break it down. And so it takes a little bit longer to then be able to tap into that energy that is available. So sugars are going to be your quick energy source. So if you introduce a very sugary food to your body, so cookies, candies, cake, things like that, those sugars get broken down very quickly. They make it into your system very quickly, but you also burn through them very quickly. So if you are about to do some sort of physical activity and you have a candy bar, you are going to get about 20 minutes worth of quick energy from that candy bar, and then it's going to taper off very, very quickly. If you are ingesting something that is a starch based food, so potatoes, breads, things of that nature, because the body is going to take longer to break that down, you are going to get a sustained amount of energy over a longer period of time. A lot of times, if you are in athletics, you'll hear about things like carbohydrate loading. If you are carbohydrate loading, you are not looking at the sugars, you are looking at the starches. So all of that, or that digestive process, starts within the mouth with the amylase coding and looking for those carbohydrates in the foods that you have eaten and starting that process of digesting them right there in the mouth. So then when you swallow, the food goes down to your stomach, and that is where we are now going to introduce pepsin to the food. We did talk about pepsin, talked about how it starts out as an inactive form as pepsinogen. It has to get converted over to pepsin, and that happens with the introduction of the hydrochloric acid that is present in your stomach so that you can target those proteins being digested in the stomach and the stomach alone. Now, when we look at proteins, they are also going to offer 4 calories for every 1 gram. So they are exactly like carbohydrates in that respect. 4 calories for every 1 gram of protein that you eat. So that protein gets targeted within the stomach, and then the food is going to continue on into the small intestine. And the small intestine is where it's going to get introduced to the third digestive enzyme, which is bile. We talked about bile being a very dark green substance, and when it is introduced to the food, it is going to target fat. Now, the breakdown of fat is a little bit different. Fat is a very sticky substance, and it will stick to things that it comes in contact with. So it will stick to the walls of blood vessels, it will stick to other fat molecules. So when we look at breaking down fat, it goes through a slightly different process than carbohydrates and proteins. It's going to go through a process known as emulsification, which basically means that bile is going to wash over these fat molecules and take them from being these large, sticky molecules and break them down into smaller pieces. It is not true digestion because the parts, the elements that make up the fat, they are not separated. It's just the fat molecule itself is going to be taken from a larger to smaller pieces. So that process of washing over the fat molecules and making it smaller pieces, we call that emulsification. So that is going to take place within the small intestine. Now, the difference with fats is that for every 1 gram of fat that you are eating, you are getting 9 calories. So that is more than double what you have when you look at carbohydrates and when you look at proteins. So the reason that I'm talking about carbohydrates and proteins and fats when there are other things that are going to be available within the foods that you're eating, like minerals and vitamins, is because of the fact that those are the only 3 calorie sources that you have. So when you look at food labels and it's talking about the calorie content, there are only 3 places that those calories can come from, and that is from anything that is carb, protein, or fat based. You can get minerals, you can get vitamins, but they don't carry any calorie content with them. So that's why we tend to focus on those three when we talk about those digestive enzymes. So the other thing that we need to talk about when we look at carbohydrates, proteins, and fats is that your body will actually work through them in a very specific way. So anything that is carbohydrate calories, your body will burn off first. So your sugars and your starches, anything from your diet on a daily basis that goes into your system, when you start using calories, those are going to be the calories that are used up first. Once you use all of your carb based calories, now your body is going to go into burning fat calories. So you've burned through all your carbs, you're still using energy. Now it's going to tap into those fat calories and it's going to start using those. If you burn through all of those fat calories that came in through your diet, your body will actually start to convert some of your stored fat and use that for a backup or a supplemental energy source. Now, the third calorie source, proteins. Your body is very hesitant to use that as an energy source once it goes into your system. And the reason for that is we use proteins in so many different places. It's found in your muscles, it's found in your cells, it's found in your DNA, your organelles. Pretty much everything in your body is going to have something that is made out of protein. So, because it is so highly needed in a variety of different places, your body does not want to depend on it as a calorie source. The only time that your body will start to use protein as a calorie source is in very extreme situations. So if you are in a starvation type situation where your body has no other choice, doesn't have access to food for whatever reason, or it is self-inflicted starvation, your body will actually start to then break down proteins. Now, one of the easiest places for your body to get protein is going to be from anything that is a muscle base. So we have over 600 muscles in the human body. There's a lot of places that it can go to. But when people struggle with starvation for an extended period of time, one of the major places that they have to worry about is their heart and what damage is being done to their heart. Because you have muscle in your heart and your body doesn't really care if it's taking the protein out of muscles that are in your legs or if it's taking the protein out of the heart muscle. It just knows that it needs access to more protein to keep you going. And so a lot of times if people have had extended periods of starvation, they will have heart trouble with that as well because that heart muscle was weakened as the body was having to take protein out of alternate muscle sources. So we use the carbs first, then we go to fat, then we look at fat reserves, and as a last resort, we would use protein as an energy source, but that is avoided at all costs if possible. The other thing that we talked about and kind of introduced were the vitamins. And so vitamins, there are two different categories. You have your fat-based vitamins and you have water-soluble vitamins. So when you look at the fat-based or fat-soluble vitamins, there are four that fall into that particular category. And when we talk about a fat-soluble vitamin, this indicates that for that particular vitamin, if you take in more than what you need in a given day, your body actually has the ability to store it. And it's stored in one of two places. You can store it in your existing fat tissue, or it can be stored in the liver. So any of the fat soluble vitamins, you do have the ability to store and hang on to those. And that's a mechanism that the body uses just because, again, a lot of what happens and functions within the body go back to time periods when things were not predictable, when food was not as easily accessible as it is today, and you didn't necessarily know when and if your next meal was coming. And so the body has the ability to hang on to some of those vitamins just to make sure that if you can't get them in through your diet, that you have them in reserve somewhere in your body that you can tap into if needed. So the four vitamins that fall into the fat soluble would be A, D, E, and K. So when we look at those vitamins, because they are fat soluble and they can be stored in the body, they are also easier to overdose on. And a lot of times when people hear vitamins, we associate them with being good. They help keep us healthy, they do a lot of good things for our body. But too much of anything is not good. And so, with these being stored in the body, if you take in too much over an extended period of time, there are actually side effects that are associated with that. Vitamin A is going to be huge in eyesight and maintaining your eyesight health. Typically, is going to be found in your yellow and orange vegetables. And when you see vitamin A listed on some packages, it's not listed as vitamin A, it's listed as beta carotene. Because in the food itself, it's beta carotene and it doesn't get converted over to vitamin A until you actually ingest it. Vitamin D is a little bit unique because the only natural source of vitamin D is going to be through sunlight. So you have chemicals in your skin that when they are exposed to UV rays, they actually transition or turn into vitamin D. And so you do need to have some sun exposure, some limited exposure to UV rays so that those chemicals can be converted over into vitamin D. A lot of foods now are being fortified with vitamin D. It's being artificially placed in those food sources just to make sure that people get them. So milk, a lot of times you'll see vitamin D milk. It's now in a lot of orange juice. Some cereals will now fortify with vitamin D because those are things that people tend to take in on a regular basis, and it's an alternate way to get vitamin D into your system. Vitamin D plays a huge role in calcium absorption. So it tag teams with calcium to help it be easier to absorb into the body. So a lot of times if somebody is given a calcium supplement, they will also be told to take vitamin D just because it increases your ability to absorb it. You have vitamin E, which is going to play a huge role in maintaining your skin health. And then you also have vitamin K, which is going to play a big role in blood clotting. So the higher levels of vitamin K that you have, the easier it is for your blood to clot, especially if you have an injury or a wound somewhere in the body. And the best place to get your vitamin K is going to be through dark leafy green vegetables. On the other side, we have your water solubles, and there are 9 water-soluble vitamins. And the water-solubles get all of the B class vitamins. And so there are several different types of Bs. They get a B letter and a number, and they alternatively also get a name as well. So you'll see them in both ways. And then you also have vitamin C that falls into this category. Now, with vitamin C, this is going to play a huge role in your immune health. So you'll always kind of make that association, or people make that association with vitamin C and immunity, and that is a relationship that those two have. And then for the B class vitamins, the B class vitamins are going to play some type of role in metabolism. And we have several different B vitamins, and they do different things. So some help with the metabolism of carbohydrates, others help with the metabolization of fats, but several different types of vitamin B, and they do all play a role in the process of metabolization. So metabolizing is just taking an existing molecule, breaking it down into those individual parts so that it can be rebuilt into other things that the body can actually use. Now, one of your B class vitamins is known as folic acid, and folic acid is going to be a very important vitamin during prenatal health. And even prior to getting pregnant, folic acid is going to be something that you want to increase your intake of if you are planning on getting pregnant. Folic acid helps in the formation of DNA, and so when you are planning on getting pregnant and then through the pregnancy, you want to make sure that the baby has the maximum amount or the best situation during those early stages, especially when that DNA and those new cells are being formed, so that things are copied over correctly and they just have the absolute best chance at a good start. So folic acid is something that will really be talked about and pushed. It is in higher levels of prenatal vitamins than what it would be in other types of vitamins. Even if you take a women's vitamin, those prenatal vitamins will have an elevated amount of folic acid in them. Some people, when they are pregnant, especially early in their pregnancy, will complain of morning sickness, which is not uncommon. What some people fail to realize is that the elevated amounts of folic acid in those prenatal vitamins could be part of the cause of that morning sickness, because a lot of people, the response to higher amounts of folic acid is actually that they feel the sensation, they become nauseated. And so there's a relationship there as well. The last thing that I want to talk about before we end this conversation has to do with your fat deposition and the relationship of different hormones in your body and how that translates to where fat gets deposited in the body. So, when we think about the human body, there's a lot of different body shapes out there, and people will carry excess weight in different places on their body. But what a lot of people fail to realize is that there's an association between where fat is stored in the body and the different hormones that they have working in their system at the time. So, fat deposition is going to be caused anytime that you take in more calories than you burn off in a given day. Again, thinking back to a time period where food was not easy to come by, the body doesn't want to waste any of those calories because it's ingrained kind of in your brain that you don't necessarily know when or if your next meal is coming. And so instead of wasting those calories, your body will store them. So anytime that you take in more calories than what you burn off, your body's going to hang on to those calories, and those extra calories are going to get converted into fat. Now, where they end up in your body is actually going to be determined by hormone levels that are in your system. And that is going to account for people having different body shapes. So, some people will actually carry their weight in their abdomen. And in gentlemen, if they have low levels of testosterone in their body, so for whatever reason their testosterone levels are lower than what they should be, if they tend to take on excess fat, they will carry that excess fat in their abdomen. So around the stomach region is where that extra fat is going to go. For females, if they have higher levels of estrogen in their system, they will actually carry that extra fat, or the fat deposition is going to happen within the chest region and within the hips and thighs. You also have cortisol. So if a woman is releasing high levels of cortisol, that will translate into fat deposition happening more in the abdominal core. And then you also have growth hormone. If somebody has low levels of growth hormone within their system, their excess fat, or if they are storing fat, is going to be deposited in the back of the arms and the legs. So, fat deposition within the body, where it is deposited once it is formed, is going to be dependent somewhat on genetics, but then also on what the hormone levels are in your system. So, like I said, testosterone levels are a little bit lower in guys. Their fat deposition is going to go into their abdomen. If their growth hormone is off, now that fat deposition is going to be seen in the arms and the legs. So there is a little bit of an explanation as to why people have different body shapes. You can look at two people that weigh the exact same amount, but their body shape will be very, very different. And that is a telltale sign that hormone levels within those two people are at different places. For one person, it might be their testosterone level is off. For somebody else, it could be cortisol. And there are lots of different examples. You could get into leptin and things like that and talk about how that translates to fat deposition in the body. But just understand that there's an extra piece there with that fat deposition. Very quickly, also I want to jump back to the vitamins for just a second. I didn't mention that your water solubles do not stay in the body for more than 24 hours. So if you ingest a extra amount of vitamin C on a daily basis, or any of the B vitamins, that is going to be flushed out on a regular basis through your excretory system. So very, very hard to overdose on your B vitamins and your C vitamins because of the fact that they are constantly being flushed out of your system and you do not hang on to those. And I apologize for missing that the first time around, but just quickly jot that down with your vitamins. Fat solubles get stored in your fat, they will stay with you for a long period of time. Your water solubles get flushed out on a regular basis. And so you have to, again, get that good balanced diet in so that you are constantly replacing those vitamins and getting them in through your diet. So check out Blackboard for your assignment. And then we have spring break through the week of March 10th. So I will see you guys at our next face to face on March 17th. Have a good break.